back again to join you guys for Instagram Live as we talk about interesting topics, things in retail and business, things that are going to help us hopefully be more successful, right? That's kind of the whole point of our conversations, are that we actually can find ways and opportunities of being able to maximize this. Now, today's topic of conversation is on risk mitigation. And I really want to give special props and shout outs to JB, who suggested that this would be a topic of conversation for today. Many of you guys said, yes, I want to talk about risk mitigation, which is shocking. Most of the time, we're always thinking about how risky this industry is, in which we don't always spend the time that we need to kind of talk about ways in which we can mitigate risk. Now, let's kind of unpack a little bit about what risk mitigation is and what that means. So, in essence, guys, when you're starting a business, right, you can walk into it looking at it as almost a set of circumstances and kind of a hypothesis. And in the hypothesis, you're basically, let's say in fashion, your knowledge of the market combined with what you think is going to be product ready, right? And then you're basically kind of coordinating that within business infrastructure, right? Launching a fashion business is not just having, a good idea or understanding the market. It's truly about how do you kind of take all of these components and put them together, right? And second component to that has a lot to operation to do with capacity building and understanding where you need to invest in your resources. And as you as a CEO founder, what your core competencies and strengths are, I think that is going to be the most important thing to kind of first kind of knock out of the park. So last time we were chatting, we talked a lot about understanding your own core competencies. So as we're kind of looking at this trifecta of how things are kind of coming together, right? We're going to unpack a little bit of what the concept of risk mitigation means, and then we're going to go through some key differences of your business, but what does it mean? So to mitigate risk means we all walk into these businesses being on oars and knowing we're going to take a shit ton of risk, right? We know that we might money, we're going to lose a lot of time. We may hire people and fire them. Relationships are on the line. Starting a business is very, very risky. And inherently, we have to make a lot of decisions, and most of them have to do with our own personal resources. But when we're looking at allocation of resources, that's really where you want to have a good over-under of what industry is about, right? You want to have an understanding of where you can pull different levers, how you might be able to negotiate different contracts. So we're going to go through some different scopes of risk mitigation. But you guys, this conversation is pretty short. So if you have specific questions, so JB, if there's some specific threads you want us to pull, or any of you guys who are here on Instagram Live who want to pull the thread on some specific topics, very happy to kind of pull back the onion and I like onions, pull back the onion layers and, kind of dig a little bit deeper into your specific circumstance. But let's just talk in general about some of the major issues that you when you're launching. So the first thing I always think about is mitigating risk on inventory. People look at their P&L, like I was talking to someone the other day and she was like, oh, well, we have so much money in inventory, right? Isn't that an asset, right? We have inventory. Well, it depends on how you look at inventory. So from my perspective, inventory is always a liability. I look at inventory from the perspective of a game of hot potato, right? The moment I have inventory, it is my job to sell it, which means before I even have the inventory, a risk mitigation strategy is to flip and figure out how you're going to sell the product, right? That is a very important component to mitigating this thing called inventory. Now, yes, you can look at inventory as being an asset, because if you were to sell your business, someone would set a value on your inventory and your inventory be considered an asset. But as the CEO of a business, right, you're looking at inventory as really a liability because your job is to be selling through it consistently. Now, it's also been such a big, heavy topic these days, as you might have been reading Business of Fashion or even New York Times, a lot of other outlets, and people have been talking about, retail's inventory issue. And that's because we get caught up in these different ways in which inventory has to be accounted for. And so unfortunately, when it comes to the accounting of your inventory, if you look at it as an asset rather than a liability, you're likely to make some very big mistakes. For one, not really paying attention as to how you're going to move the product, because you're assuming that you're just going to consistently be inflating your inventory line as you continue to move through markdowns and sales and eventually liquidation of product. So rule number one, least amount of inventory as possible. No more inflated inventory. How are you going to mitigate that risk? Well, number one, my first suggestion is to always spend more money on your cost of goods to buy lower units when you launch. You do not need to have 500 units per color style. You need to have like 100 units per color style. Why? Because you don't know what's going to sell out, right? You don't know. And unless you're one of those brands that you actually have a strong read on the market, or you have an understanding that your particular market positioning and launch strategy is going to have you sell through all of your units in the beginning, most of you guys are not going to have the budget to invest in being able to have a stellar launch that's going to blow it out of the park. Most of you guys out there are actually working and nickel and diming your businesses in order to be able to test and iterate and test and iterate. Now, if you have a lot of resources behind your launch, you can kind of substantiate more units on inventory because you have a marketing and a sales plan in order to help you get there, right? And so if you have the marketing budget, chances are you're going to probably see some more sales when you get started. But there is no point in having a lot of inventory at a low cost of goods per unit if you do not have the actual resources to substantiate the marketing component. So you kind of want to work backwards, right? There's no point in having a lot of inventory if you're not actually going to create the vehicles to sell it, right? So I think that is super duper important to be mindful of. Now, when it comes to the other component of inventory management, so we said it's going to be higher cost of goods for units so that you have lower units, so you have an easier opportunity to sell through it. You're also going to be developing your marketing strategy on something that is real and tangible, not on something that is fake and in the sky. I cannot tell you how many times people say, well, I don't want to invest in marketing because I haven't made any money off my brand. Yeah, no joke. No shit, right? It's like you're not going to make like any money off of it if you spend the money building the brand, you don't spend the money on inventory and inventory management and pushing out there in terms of marketing. So guys, like whatever resources you think you're investing in your inventory and your marketing, maybe you should flip it and spend more money on marketing, less money on inventory to actually be building that customer acquisition channel so you can actually get the traction that you're looking for and that you need. So that's another big component on mitigating risk. The next one is, people don't often think about this other thing, which is shipping and logistics and returns. So unfortunately, what'll happen is if you just go into your business assuming that everyone's going to buy everything and no one will return anything, you leave yourself like gaping wide open for major issues, right? So you're basically leaving yourself open for the potential of high returns, right? You're going to have backlogs of customer service emails, no ways of tracking it, no ways of being smart about how you're actually getting smart in terms of how you're actually moving through customer service issues. You need to understand for returns, who's paying for shipping, who's paying for you need negotiating shipping rates. So most of you guys seem to think that you're going to be shipping out of your studio apartment, which is fine, right, in the beginning, but the goal here is at the moment that you actually see some inflection in your business, you actually have a 3PL or distribution center that you're going to be able to work with. Now, a 3PL stands for third-party logistics, and it's extremely important that you figure out what you guys are going to be able to partner with. So even though you might be shipping out of your studio to begin with, shipping, returns, RTVs, damages, that's going to be hard for you to manage on your own, right? You need to be able to mitigate those issues, right? So that means setting yourself up to begin with in a very smart and cohesive way. And so what I would say, guys, the first thing when it comes to understanding your shipping and logistics is, number one, really figure out, are you shipping internationally or are you shipping domestically? Honestly, domestically is going to be the best way that I believe you'll be able to initially kind of get your brand off the gate. The issue when it comes to shipping internationally is all of a sudden you're dealing with customs and duties, and that's going to be a real pain in your tuchus. So I would suggest, guys, if you're an international brand and you're wondering about even shipping, to the US, or kind of, what that's going to look like, even in terms of the number of days, you may want to think about getting a distribution center that's going to be domestic in the States. So how do we mitigate risk on shipping and logistics? Figure out who your 3PLs are going to be. Figure out what their costing is. Remember, there are a lot of little details in costing. What's the warehousing fee? How many picks per order? Right? Is the first or second pick going to be free? Is it the third pick? Like, how is it that we're actually going to be looking at the actual cost of fulfillment? Your packaging is another cost that gets on there. Then you're looking at, if there's any, besides warehousing, the manual labor for any of the customer service, or bringing any of the boxes, right, when they do cycle counts. So shipping and logistics could really break your bank. It's something that most people do not talk about, and it's actually extremely important and really valuable that you take the time to figure out what your options are with that. Because if you do not, you'll end up eating away at your profit margin and wondering, like, where the hell did the money go? The other thing that I think is really important, right, and JB, I'm going to answer your question in a second, is the cost for your packaging out the gate. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen brands who are extremely excited about custom or beautiful packaging, only to find out that the packaging that they like is actually packaging that's going to cost them about $7 per box in order to get out the gate. So as you're looking at packaging and as you're looking at the ways of doing shipping, please make sure you're looking very conscious of your costs when it comes to those packages and but that is a big that most people don't think about. Okay, so what are disaster recovery strategy as relates to pandemic, fires, natural disasters? So, JB, when you're thinking about disaster recovery, or even thinking about kind of this current pandemic that we're in, right? It is, it's hard to mitigate risk of a natural disaster unless you have, let's say, a freestanding brick and mortar store. So I guess in our component of like an e-com or a DTC brand, some of the things that I've been seeing, and maybe the question maybe needs to be clarified a tiny bit more for me. I'm going to give it a stab and then feel free to clarify. But when I'm kind of thinking of, how, I'll give you a great example. USPS is going through a very difficult time period. So USPS is not doing well. And packages are stuck. They're stuck in pre-shipment. They're stuck. They're not doing well at all. So as a brand, right, how do you manage the risk of shipping with USPS, right? And so when it's something like, relying on a shipping provider that should be supported by the government and, should be something that we can rely on, and now we're actually not relying on it, what you really want to focus on is kind of your communication strategy with your customers and letting them know that you are seeing delays in shipment, so they need to be patient. At the beginning of this pandemic, thousands and thousands of dollars were lost in product because USPS was having this backlog and the news hadn't really reported it. And so consumers were wondering what was going on with their shipments, and brands ended up taking a huge hit on their P&L because of the amount of replacements and refunds that they had to offer to people, even though those packages were delayed and eventually hit their final destination. So there are some financial implications here when things go wrong on that front. Okay, so clarification. It relates to your dependence on suppliers. Okay, so this is a good question. So there have always been, first of all, I've never met a manufacturer or I've never met a supplier that I didn't have to counter source from or eventually move away from after a few years. And why is that? Well, sometimes, partnerships get a little stale. Sometimes things get lazy. Sometimes you end up deciding to change direction, or maybe it's, a down market product, service, or a supplier pulls up into the scene and offers you more cost competitive rates. So the first thing that I always suggest when it comes to counter sourcing is that you should be counter sourcing your development. And you don't necessarily, that's counter sourcing product, but also production, right? So supply chain should be evaluated on almost I would say, yearly or half yearly basis. And what that means is simply having someone on your team or someone you can hire as a consultant who can help you with product and product development and sourcing. That is not me. So I don't do the product stuff, right? Someone the other day was like, "Hey, can you tell me this thing about product?" And I was like, "I have no idea. I don't make things. I create businesses, but I don't make products." So when it comes to kind of looking at how you want to be counter sourcing, what does that look like? Well, in essence, it costs money to have samples made, and you always want to have a sample making budget so that you can be counter sourcing the development of certain garments. You also want to be having a sourcing budget, right? Because you want to be able to continue to source new materials and new fabrications. So a lot of this really just has to do, when it comes to mitigating risk on your supply chain, a lot of that actually just has to do with how prepared are you in case your manufacturer, your suppliers, anyone in your supply chain ends up having to shut down, right? Or ends up having to close up their businesses because of, let's say, a pandemic. We saw this definitely in the case of manufacturing coming to a halt in India, in Spain, even in Portugal, right? So a lot of these places that are big hotspots for production ended up really suffering a lot. And then what happened? Well, basically, once things started to open up again, there was a huge backlog of production. And if you were a small brand, well, you got pushed to the side, right? So if you were in that position, right, well, what is the right course of action if your brand is being pushed to the side? The thing when it comes to, managing that is being able to have some other people up your sleeve. So JB, don't get me wrong here. I'm not suggesting that you change suppliers or partners. What I'm saying is you want to evaluate your suppliers. You want to evaluate your partnerships. Within a 6-month time period, you should be able to see how partnerships are flowing, how things are working. You don't want to make those big changes. In fact, it takes a while. Like usually what would happen is if you were transitioning between two factories is you would probably split produce, right, one of those orders between two different factories in order to make sure, right, that they could actually keep up with your production needs, the quality control, all of that. It's a long process to set it up. My point is if you're not counter sampling, right, so some of these bigger factories won't charge you for sampling because they actually want you to, they'll include it into the price of the PO of the final order. And so what I would suggest doing is paying to sample so you can actually see the quality of their work, right? It's much easier to pay $100 to sample a garment or $200 to sample a garment than to move an entire production order or PO to a whole new factory you've never worked with before, right? That's a big commitment. So what I would suggest doing is not switching it every 6 months, but actually to counter source and be on the market, right? Attend the trade shows where you're meeting new suppliers, where you're meeting new manufacturers. Challenging to do in a time like today where it's COVID and we're all kind of behind lock and key. However, very important to consider kind of as you are, as you are looking at new ways of finding partnerships. right? So it's exactly, JB. It's like giving them a performance review. And it's not something that you necessarily have to do with such a strict eye. You want to maintain a good sense of camaraderie and familiarity. And guys, we're building our families, right? We're building our fashion families, our retail families. But it is important to have evaluations of partnerships. On a yearly basis, you probably want to sit down as you would with any sort of performance review of your employees and staff and maybe agency partners. You would want to do something similar with your design and development team, with your manufacturers, right? Even with your shipping carriers. Like, should you be saving money by switching to a new shipping provider? You may not know until you've been in business for a year, when you can actually see like what are the zip codes you're shipping to, what are the weights that you're shipping at, and is there a better opportunity and time and place for you to be able to change that in order to get better deals. For example, companies like FedEx in the last few years have done a tremendous job with actually creating better rates for smaller businesses, right? They didn't have that before, but they have it now. So as we're kind of looking at, the different tools at your disposal, what you don't want to end up being is one of those people who signs on to a platform and then is there for 10 years. And all of a sudden there's been all these new innovations in the space and you're a laggard and you're behind the times. And I've seen this a lot, guys, in terms of software and systems. There are so many new software and systems now for ERP systems, your inventory management, sales analysis, that if you're not actually kind of looking at this, in a more frequent basis, right? You actually might be doing things more mechanically. You may actually not be taking advantage of faster processing or new software or new systems. So I think that is, that's kind of my answer, JB, in terms of, supply chain management, kind of looking and evaluating things. Again, guys, when it comes to this concept of risk mitigation, basically what it means is do your homework, evaluate possible resources, consult and advise with people who know what the hell they're talking about so that you don't end up throwing a bunch of money down the toilet. I can't tell you how many people I've actually, spoken to who've made poor commitments on, or made poor decisions when hiring, right? So please really make sure you guys are doing your due diligence when it comes to stuff like that. Really important. Oh, my nose is itchy. Okay. Do I have any specific CRM vendors that I recommend? It really depends on what you're looking to achieve with the CRM platform. Honestly, I think the first thing everyone should be investing in before they go into CRM is really good database, just like newsletter managers. So getting a good email, good ESP, an email service provider, that can actually do a lot for you. And really juicing it to the maximum capabilities before you go into CRM. You may or may not need that, right? So the other part of like mitigating risk is not signing up for a bunch of different software systems that like sound really cool, but that like maybe you don't need. So I would say, get specific about what you need it to do for you, and then start to reverse engineer those things. I've also found, guys, like what's really cool is sometimes, a lot of new systems and SaaS products are launching. What's really fun about that is usually you can lock in really great small business kind of early adopter rates into a lot of these programs. If it turns out to be something great that scales, you're going to basically be, scaling up with them. And as they get new benefits and features, you benefit, but usually lock in and get grandfathered into these rates, which I think is really cool. All right, guys, that is all for today on risk mitigation. Basically, it's, don't be a dummy, strategize, do your research, evaluate your systems and processes, look for potential cost centers that you may not have thought about, right? That could end up really eating out of your P&L. Like you really got to make sure you get what those hidden cost centers are, because if you do not plan for them, they can really shoot you in the foot. And you don't want to do that, right? You spend too much time and energy to build a business. it would be a shame to kind of watch your profit margins get thrown away based on a lack of planning strategically. All right, guys, that's it for me. I'm Syama. I'm the CEO of Scaling Retail, and it's a pleasure to be able to chat with you guys. I will be back next week. And then also, you guys, we do these really fun kind of one-on-one sessions. It's really awesome. I love doing them. It's really small group sessions. So if you guys are interested in unpacking your business a little bit more, stay tuned as like Makers Row and Embark kind of announces these things. Thank you, Rain. It's so sweet. I feel like Syama is suiting us up for a business battle. Hell yeah. Yeah, we are. We are like totally getting suited up for a business battle, right? We must charge on. The retail struggle is real. All right, guys, I will talk to you later. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.